want to go across our borders now, right here on Checkpoint, and over to Kigali in Rwanda. Now, it's been just over 1 month since the presidential election in Rwanda, where President Paul Kagame was re-elected with a 99% of the votes. Tonight, our reporter Trix Ngado joins us live from the capital, Kigali, to tell us about the political and security situation in a country whose president has been accused of being an authoritarian. Trix Ngado, good evening from Kigali. So talk to us about, the situation and whether life is slowly getting back to normal after the election season in Kigali, Rwanda.
Thank you, Yvonne. And just a slight correction right there. We're not in Kigali, Rwanda. We're actually in Bujumbura in Burundi, whereby there was a mass protest against a report by the United Nations, whereby that portrayed the country as being in sort of chaos, because they say that they were alluding to facts and things that happened in 2015, whereby people were exiled or rather ran away from the country and are now refugees. And a lot of people died due to atrocities committed by people from different sides of the divide. So we've been keeping up with the local politics here. Things have calmed down after yesterday's mass protest across the streets of Bujumbura. But then we were trying to find out what is the source. Why is this? Are the people so discontent, especially party affiliates and party members of Sendede FDD, which is the ruling party here? So we caught up with some party officials who told us more about the history of this country. We know that Burundi also was affected by the 1994 genocide, and they have been trying to work their way away from tribal politics. But then such reports that portray the country in such a light that they say is not what is the reality on the ground make them livid, make them unhappy, because they say they are trying to even engage in dialogue. But before, let me not overstate things. Earlier on, I went on to interview the Kenyan ambassador to Burundi, His Excellency Kenneth Vitisia, who told us more on the situation here. And he is an expert on matters Burundi politics, because he has been in this country in some 6 years. So he is well aware of what he's talking about. So take a look at this interview that we had earlier on. Report. Now with us is Ambassador Ken Vitisia, who's going to give us an overall assessment on matters Burundi, having been in the country for many years. Welcome, Your Excellency.
Thank you very much.
Well, could you give us an assessment of the actual situation security-wise in the country?
At the moment, everybody acknowledges the fact that things are much better in Burundi now. The report by the UN that came out recently, which seems to indicate that the ICC will be indicating some of the Burundians whom they believe committed atrocities, has raised a lot of heat in this country. People believe that what happened in 2015 is not exactly what is happening now. But if you look at the report seems to suggest what happened in 2015, when actually there were human rights abuses from both sides as the conflict over the third mandate of President Nkurunziza was being debated. But now, from 2016 up to now, with the Burundian dialogue taking place, things are much better. The EAC-led process is calling upon Burundians to come together and work together towards a way forward towards the next 2020 elections.
And speaking of those dialogues, the inter-Burundi dialogue that is being led by the EAC, you are a co-facilitator. What is the progress so far?
So far, we are holding what we call informal consultations. These informal consultations are designed to bring sides that have hardline positions to soften some of those positions, so now that we can have an inclusive dialogue in Arusha, perhaps in October, so that we can all agree on the way forward for Burundi to chart its own way forward towards the 2020 elections.
And do you believe that this dialogue will lead to justice and closure for some of the victims who faced atrocities back in 2015?
If you look at the 8-point agenda that we have for the dialogue, one of the issues that we have put on the agenda is the need for justice. And it is going to be discussed among Burundians. How are they going to achieve justice from what they believe happened in 2015? Although some Burundians believe that under the Arusha Accord, there is the Truth and Reconciliation Commission that should look wholesomely into all issues Burundi.
Okay. So right, so that report that has been discussed at length by the ambassador is something that has not made people happy, like I said earlier. And let me just detail some of the facts that were put in that report. They say that the UN, that is, it interviewed over 500 respondents, but the Burundian government has gone against that fact, saying that the people who were interviewed were just a few people from Burundi, but the rest were from refugee camps across the region, or people who fled a few years back, and people in diaspora. So they say these people cannot give actual facts of the reality that is on the ground, and therefore you cannot say that this was a valid report. So they disagree with that. And also, before this report was released on September the 4th, before that, the UN had released yet another report in, I think, July or June or thereabouts, and this report was something that the Burundian government frowned upon, and they gave preconditions, saying that in order for other organizations such as the UN to come into this country and conduct certain operations and investigations and research and just find out what's happening, they need to work with them in certain ways. But when they gave this proposal, the UN did not accept, and therefore there was a bit of a deadlock, and they weren't able to come in and freely work the way they wanted. In the UN report, the UN says they really had to be careful in their work so as to protect their sources and make sure that they are not harmed because they spoke out about some of these atrocities. The people that are being who are being accused of causing some of these problems, they include extrajudicial killings, alleged extrajudicial killings, sexual violations. They also include forced disappearances and inhumane treatment. It is said that these were things that were committed by people highly placed in the Burundian government, and of course we also have security agencies being accused. We have other people such as the youth faction of the ruling party. So these people say this is not what happened. There was a problem after the 2015 disputed election where current President Pierre Nkurunziza did run for his presidency despite opposition from certain quarters. But then they said after this, they did move on. And there's that dialogue we've just heard about that is supposed to bring about reconciliation. And this is the work of the ESC. And therefore, it is still in the works. It's not something that has been concluded. So the sentiments that I got for party members, people who are in support of the ruling party, they say that they want foreign elements not to interfere. And we know that this report has also suggested that those who are accused, the names that were put in the report, should actually be taken to The Hague, to the ICC, to pay for their crimes or for justice to be done. But we know that Burundi is actually in the process of removing itself from the ICC. So there's a bit of a conflict right there. The report is asking for one thing, and yet the Burundi government is also moving in a different direction. So what happened yesterday, if I could paint you another picture, was a massive protest that happened. Thousands upon thousands of people came out to the streets singing patriotic songs, chanting party slogans, holding up placards, just saying what they want. They do not agree with that report. They're unhappy with the sentiments that were expressed in that report, and they want something different. So the way forward could be anyone's guess, because there are discrepancies on both sides, because we had the UN coming up with a report that has been disputed because of the sources, while we're having a Burundi government that is saying that it is working on itself and does not want any outside interference. It can handle matters, and if they're perpetrators, they trust in their own judicial system, and they have things in order. Well, the picture that has been painted in many media houses across, or let's say international media, or the typical Burundi picture that you usually have, is that of a conflict-ridden third world country. But you see, when we've come here, our experience has been quite different. It's not necessarily that of a third world mess, but it's a country that's trying to put its things in order. Yeah, so that is what we have gathered so far here in Bujumbura. Back to you in studio, Yvonne.
Thank you. Trix Ngado in Burundi, in the capital, Bujumbura, and not Kigali, Rwanda, as earlier stated.